They ask me about the Third Concerto as though it is a monster. Perhaps it is. I composed it in 6 weeks, in the summer of 1909, at my estate in Ivanovka. The fields were gold, the evenings were quiet, and I sat at my piano and wrote a piece that, to this day, pianists speak of the way soldiers speak of battles they survived. I composed it for America. A touring piece, practical almost, something to carry across the ocean and play for people who had never heard my name. I could not have known then what it would cost them to play it, or what it would cost me to leave. My name is Sergei Rachmaninoff, and this is the story of my Third Piano Concerto. To understand the third, you must first understand what came before it. In 1897, my first symphony was performed in St. Petersburg. I was 23 years old. I believed in it completely. The performance was a catastrophe. The conductor, I will not say he was drunk, though others said it freely, led my symphony into the ground. The audience was bewildered. The critics were not. César Cui wrote that my symphony would delight the inmates of a conservatory in hell. I did not compose for 3 years. 3 years of silence, of sitting at pianos and hearing nothing worth writing down. You cannot understand what that is, to be a composer who cannot compose. It is like being a swimmer who has forgotten water. I was recovered, in the end, by a doctor named Nikolai Dahl. Each morning he would speak to me in a kind of hypnotic trance. You will compose. You will work with great facility. The concerto will be of excellent quality. It sounds absurd. It was not. The second concerto, the one they play at film premieres and in love stories, came directly from those sessions. But the shadow of 1897 never fully left me. I composed every subsequent work, wondering, is this the piece that breaks me again? Ivanovka was my anchor. 2,000 acres of Russian soil, fields, orchards, silence. I managed it as a farmer as much as a composer. I cared about the harvest. I cared about my horses. I needed the weight of real things. In the summer of 1909, I was there with my family, my wife Natasha, my daughters Irina and Tatiana, and I had accepted an invitation to tour America. I needed a new concerto, something that would show, in one piece, everything I knew about the piano, everything I believed music could do to a room full of strangers. The opening theme came to me quickly. I cannot tell you where it came from. Some say it sounds like a Russian folk song, perhaps. I was not thinking of any particular melody. I was simply singing to myself. A quiet, walking tune. Almost a question. But beneath that simple question, I was building a cathedral. The entire concerto, all 45 minutes of it, grows from that fragile little melody, like a vine that covers a building until you can no longer see the stone beneath. I traveled to America by steamship. The crossing took days. I had brought a muted practice keyboard, a doomy keyboard, silent, used only to train the fingers, and for the entire voyage I practiced the Third Concerto on keys that made no sound. Think about that for a moment. The other passengers heard nothing. My fingers moved across silent ivory. The music existed only inside my hands and my mind, not yet real, not yet air. A concerto rehearsed in complete silence, crossing the ocean toward its own premiere. In retrospect, it seems to me a kind of metaphor for the whole of my life. Now, the cadenza. Slight dry pause. The first movement has 2 possible cadenzas. I wrote both. The shorter one is already formidable. The longer one, what musicians call the ossia cadenza, is something else entirely. I dedicated the concerto to Josef Hoffmann. He was a great pianist, small hands, extraordinary economy. He looked at the Ossia Cadenza and declined to perform the piece. His hands, he said, were not suited to it. He was probably right. My hands span a 13th. 13 piano keys from the tip of my thumb to the tip of my little finger. Most pianists can reach 10, perhaps 11. When I wrote the cadenza, I was writing for my hands. I did not think enough about other people's hands. Dry. I have called it, privately, a cadenza for elephants. I include myself among the elephants. The man who played it best was not me. It was Vladimir Horowitz. In 1930, with Beecham conducting, he gave a performance that I can only describe as beyond what I imagined when I wrote it. He found things in my cadenza that I had not known were there. I told him so. He was 37 years old. He looked at me and said nothing for a moment. And then he smiled, and I understood that he knew exactly what he had done. In 1917, I left Russia. I told myself it was for a concert tour of Scandinavia. I did not return for the rest of my life. Ivanovka was gone. The estate, the fields, the horses, the harvest, the revolution swept all of it away. I became a wealthy man again in America through 20 years of touring, but I became a man without a country. I composed very little after leaving Russia. The Fourth Concerto, the Rhapsody on a theme of Paganini, the Third Symphony, the Symphonic Dances. My last work, which I believe is among my best and which almost no one noticed at the time. The Third Concerto, though, it had been composed while I still belonged to Russia. It carries the weight of a land I could feel under my feet when I wrote it. That opening melody, that quiet question, was composed in a Russian summer, surrounded by Russian fields. When I hear it now, I hear Ivanovka. I hear what I lost. They call it one of the most difficult piano concertos ever written. They are correct. But difficulty is not the point. The point is what it asks of you to hold something fragile and enormous at the same time. To begin with a question so simple a child could hum it, and then, over 45 minutes, to find what that question truly costs. To it. He was probably right. I have called it, privately, a cadenza for elephants. Caption: Rachmaninoff wrote the world's hardest piano cadenza, and even he admitted it was ridiculous. Rachmaninoff, classical music is piano. Reel 2, hook. The silent crossing. I crossed the Atlantic on a steamship, practicing my new concerto on a muted keyboard. For days, the music existed only inside my hands. No sound, just motion. A concerto rehearsed in complete silence. Caption: He practiced the world's hardest concerto in absolute silence on a ship crossing the Atlantic. Here's why. Rachmaninoff, Rach 3, classical music. Reel 3, hook, Horowitz. Vladimir Horowitz played my Third Concerto in 1930. He found things in my cadenza that I did not know were there. I told him so. He smiled. I understood that he knew exactly what he had done. Caption: The moment Rachmaninoff heard someone play his own concerto better than he could. Horowitz, Rachmaninoff, one classical piano. Baumtorn's Twitter thread. Launch thread to accompany video. Tweet 1. Rachmaninoff practiced his own new concerto in complete silence on a muted keyboard, crossing the Atlantic by steamship. The music existed only inside his hands, a thread on the Rach 3. Tweet 2. He dedicated it to Joseph Hoffmann, one of the greatest pianists of the era. Hoffmann looked at the first movement cadenza and said, "This doesn't suit my hands." He never performed the piece. The dedicatee never played it. Tweet 3. Rachmaninoff privately called the Ossia Cadenza a piece for elephants. He had a 13th span. Most pianists top out at a 10th. He literally wrote it for his own hands without thinking about everyone else's. Tweet 4. When Horowitz performed it in 1930, Rachmaninoff told him it was the greatest performance he'd ever heard, the composer telling the pianist he played it better than the composer. That says everything. Tweet 5. Martha Argerich practiced it for decades, then decided not to perform it publicly. Called it too naked, too vulnerable. This from one of the greatest pianists alive. Tweet 6. The Third Concerto was composed in a Russian summer at his estate, Ivanovka. 8 years later, he left Russia forever during the revolution. He never went back. Every time you hear that opening melody, you're hearing a man's homeland. Tweet 7. Full story on Dead Composer Society. Rachmaninoff tells it himself. Link. Rachmaninoff. Rach 3. Classical music. Dead Composers Society. Piano. Music history.